Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this Facebook Live stream. We are really excited to talk to you all about the Literacy for All bills that are currently awaiting decision in the Michigan legislature. And so thank you so much for joining us to learn more about these bills. They are an opportunity to support literacy throughout the state of Michigan and to give more equitable access to our youngsters so that they can be empowered through reading and literacy for the rest of their lives. We're so glad that you're here. And let's get into it. So today we're going to start with welcoming everyone. We're going to introduce everyone who's here today in the live stream. And then we're going to talk a little bit about who 313Reads is as an organization. We're going to give an overview of the Literacy for All bills. We'll get into some discussion with our panelists that's here today, and we will then close out with some action steps and what you can do to help support the Literacy for All bills, as well as having a question and answer session. Awesome. Okay, so a little bit about us. My name is Joy Lyman, and I'm the Michigan Education Policy Fellow with 313Reads this year. I have a long and very diverse history with education so far. I've done everything from being a classroom teacher to being a museum educator to being an instructional coach and to being, of course, an education advocate. One of the reasons why I am here today and we are having this conversation is because as a classroom teacher, I didn't always feel that I was empowered to understand the legislation that was having a huge impact on myself and the students I was teaching. And this happened like over and over. I would feel like there was something wrong and I wanted to fix it or wanted to have a say, and I didn't know how to raise my voice to do something about it. And recently, I've had the wonderful opportunity to participate in some fellowships that brought me together with policy experts and other educators, and this is one of them. And I have really taken a deep interest in early literacy. I have a history of teaching high school, but I see those impacts that early literacy has in my role. And so I'm really happy that I get to help others understand a little bit more about how to take part in the policy advocacy space if they might not have felt empowered to do that before. Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope that, we can all come together and help each other, inform each other so that we can make those changes that we're looking for. Okay, next I want to introduce Susan Ward Schmidt, who's our policy expert in the room. She's a veteran educator and advocate. She has done so much in the education space and has a wealth of knowledge to share with us. Thank you so much for being here, Susan. Do you want to say a little bit about yourself and why you're here?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm always excited to talk about ways that we can help all children learn to read. Yes, I'm a veteran teacher. I have taught children with learning disabilities, started in 1979 and retired in 19. Now still tutoring, and have been very excited to join up with Senator Jeff Irwin, to work on this legislation and to get it moving. I'm honored to currently be elected, and I'm on the Ann Arbor School Board, but I'm here as an individual and I'm not speaking for the board. So I'm anxious to hear what kind of questions your viewers might have, and I'd love to share a way with them that they can have their voices heard on this issue.
Thanks, Susan. Next, I'm going to introduce Dr. Leah Belle, who is my wonderful mentor with 313Reads, the executive director of the organization. And I've been learning so much from her so far with this fellowship, and she has so much to share and so many connections throughout our community of literacy advocates. Dr. Belle, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hi, Joy. Hi, Susan. Thanks so much for being here. I am Leah. I am along for the ride in this really rich conversation. And I'm wearing multiple hats today. So I do serve as the executive director of 313 Reads. We are a literacy coalition of more than 90 partners working towards literacy equity. But I also come wearing a mom hat. I have two little humans, we are a public school family here on the Lower East Side of Detroit. So I care a lot about, literacy success in our community and across the state. I'm also wearing the hat as the immediate past president and on the board of the Michigan Reading Association and the editor of the Michigan Reading Journal. So really excited to be wearing multiple hats. And I was a classroom teacher and literacy coach for a really, really long time. So grateful to be here today for the conversation.
Thank you so much. All right, so now we're going to move into talking a little bit about 313 Reads and why this is important to us. Leah is going to share a little bit about 313 Reads and connecting back to Literacy for All and why that's core to who we are.
Yeah, so I'll be super quick about this. Like I mentioned, we're more than 90 diverse partners working together. And what we center is that, we hear a lot about like a reading achievement gap. And we say, no, it's not an achievement gap. It's an equity, access, and justice gap. And so we want to make sure that children have access to what they need to be successful with literacy, because literacy shapes whole life trajectories, right? And it's critical for thriving families and communities. And we also know that those who are serving children, whether those are community-based literacy educators or school-based educators like teachers, that they need access to what they need. And so that's, tools and professional training. One of the really powerful things that we do as a coalition is we come together for collective learning. Some people call that professional development, but we frame it as collective learning because we say we're all teachers and we're all learners. So I'm going to learn here from Susan today. Really grateful. But also in that as we know better, we do better. I'll share that I used to be a university professor and teach people how to teach reading. And I want to go back to some of those students and say, wait, like I would do it differently now. I know better. Because we have more information now about how kids learn to read. And so I've definitely learned along the way as well. 313 Reads understands that policy is really important because it helps shape possibilities and funding and resources and accountability, like all these layers that get shaped by policy. So we're really grateful to be here today having this conversation.
Thank you so much, Leah, for adding that context and who we are. We're going to dive in now to talking about the history of the Literacy for All bills so that we can understand a little bit about the background and what they contain in them. So these bills, you can read the full text of them online. They're all posted on the House and Senate websites. So if you want to get in deeper and really understand everything that's in them, I highly recommend that you check those out. But if we're looking for a brief summary of what they contain, this is kind of a quick so that you can know and speak on them. All of this, actually, these summaries are lovely and they're sourced from the Literacy for All Michigan website. So definitely we'll talk more about that and drop that link in the chat later on in the presentation. But that's a really great resource to be advocating and learn more about these bills. So there is one bill that is in the House and two that are in the Senate. The House bill is about basically creating an advisory committee to create a dyslexia resource guide for educators and for families. The first Senate bill is to develop a screener and to give teachers professional learning on literacy instructional practices that are grounded in the science of reading. So looking for screening for K-3 students, and then also still making sure to screen 4 to 12 students for reading difficulties so that they can be supported. And then the educators who are teaching literacy across all grade levels will be given access to professional learning that is really strong in supporting what we know is going to make a difference in students' literacy. A lot of educators throughout the state of Michigan and throughout the country, they have some really great practices that they use for literacy, but they're not always grounded in the science of reading and what we know from research works. So this bill is really trying to get to that specifically, that we're using the best practices. And then the last bill is looking for teacher prep programs to offer dyslexia and evidence-based reading instruction that are grounded in the science of reading. So not only are teachers that are currently in the classroom going to be getting access to this professional learning, but also the teachers who are being prepared to become educators will be getting that instruction at universities and other teacher preparation programs. So that's a little bit about all three of those bills. I see some questions coming through in the chat, and I promise we are going to answer these. We will answer them throughout, and also at the end in our Q&A section, we'll go back and make sure that we've answered questions that are coming through too.
And I'll pop the questions up again, Susan and Joy. So they're right here and they won't go anywhere, and they're really important. Thank you, everyone, for the questions.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much. Okay. Now a quick timeline of the bills so that we can understand like where they've been and where they're going. These three bills are bipartisan. They have been since the first time that they were introduced. They were introduced first in the 2019-2020 session, but they didn't make it out of the Senate Education Committee at that time. But we aren't giving up on them. So they were reintroduced again last session in the 2021-22 session. And they did win the approval of the Senate, but they didn't make it past the House Education Committee in that time. This session, they've been reintroduced again, and we have until the end of the 2024 calendar year to get them through both the House and the Senate. The bills have been referred to the education committees in each respective chamber in the House and the Senate. But they haven't made it past that yet. So we're seeing some similarities between the last two times these bills came through. Each time there's varying circumstances that lead to some stagnation, but we're hoping that if we can come together, continue to raise our voices, that we can get them through to the finish line this time around. Okay, now we're going to get into the discussion. So we have some great expert voices in the room, and I already shared a little bit about the history of these bills, but I have not been as involved in the creation of the bills and the advocacy for these bills as Susan has. So Susan, is there anything else you can tell us about the history of these bills that would be supportive to our advocacy and just understanding where to go from here?
Yes. When we began this journey, the idea was that the legislature and the people we were working with that were in control of the legislature did not want us to get into the third grade reading law. So we had created 4 bills, a package that would actually work in tandem with it to give the third grade reading law more guidance, definitions, and teeth. That was the 2 sessions ago. So we had 2 sessions where those 4 bills were working their way through. What's different this time is that as opposed to bipartisan bills, they are being directed by the majority party, and they are bicameral, which means there are bills in the House and 1 in the House and 2 in the Senate. And what's also different is they actually are changing the language in the third grade reading law. And it's much of the same language. It's just actually being put into that law. It's not a separate part of creating a separate part of law where they talk to each other. So that's a big change. I'm hopeful at this time we understand that those bills should go into the Senate committee on Tuesday of next week in the Senate Education Committee. And we'll talk more at the end here about, how you can make a difference. I will tell you that these bills began looking at Arkansas and looking at what they were doing and then other states. And in the end, it was totally reworked in such a way that I think that our legislation is probably some of the best in the country. So it would be we would be taking a leadership role in this way if we get these bills passed.
That's wonderful. That's really exciting. I think it's really powerful to be able to look to other states and see what they're doing to learn lessons and make our legislation even stronger. So I'm excited. I hope that we can take that leadership role. You shared a little bit about why these bills were created to give a little bit more teeth to the third grade reading law initially. Is there anything else that was at the core of why these bills were created and why people came together to write these?
I think what we saw with the third grade reading law is that if you read that law now that currently is in the Michigan Constitution, there are no definitions. So when you say evidence-based or valid and reliable screening assessment, they need to be defined so that we all are on the same page what that means. And that is a big part of what this new iteration is of that third grade reading law. Particularly the thing that we're really trying to make sure is done right is that we are using, especially in the early grades, the K2, K3 space, screening assessments that actually help us find the children that need the support. It helps find children that have decoding issues, word recognition issues. These may be children that don't have dyslexia. They either are just behind, they aren't getting the proper instruction, whatever the reason, but it also will find, in most cases, our students that have dyslexia or characteristics of. So that's such an important part, because if we miss those children, then it's more of a wait to fail model. And it isn't until fourth grade, fifth grade, when they're really dropping down, and that isn't the key time. And I see Leah nodding.
Yeah.
Early instruction, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big part, is the screening. Another big part, which has already started in our state, is professional learning. And even though these bills haven't passed, there was a group of us that worked, now I think we're in our third or fourth year, to get that right now $10 million in the state budget for letters training. $1 million for Orton Gillingham training. This is training available to teachers. They can just sign up. They don't have to go through their school PD or anything. They can just sign up and say, I want to learn this. And it's very exciting that we have that. So I'll answer more as we start to get into the thick of the bills, but that assessment piece is important, that making sure people that teach reading are interfaced with reading instruction have knowledge. And then that one bill that is talking to universities, even though we can't tell universities what to do, MDE can not, I don't know if the word is accredit their program if they're not leaning on what the science teaches us about the reading brain. So this will be a game changer for our state and for our kids.
Yeah. And Susan, could we touch base on Anna's question here? Because I think this is a really important one. Again, wearing all my hats, also one is a parent. And I think, you mentioned those screenings and not waiting to fail. I think one of the things that's been really tricky is there has been this deep reluctance to use the word dyslexia in schools. And also to realize that these screenings are not diagnostic tools for dyslexia. That's not what this is calling for. It's screening tools to see, is this child struggling with some of the foundational elements of literacy, like phonemic awareness. And that's understanding that words are made up of sounds. So the word cat, k, a, t, it has 3 sounds in it. Little human doesn't even have to know what letters make those sounds yet, but to be able to segment or break apart a word into those sounds, that's called phonemic awareness. That's foundational to literacy. And those kinds of things, if we can screen for difficulties with those early, then as you mentioned, Susan, there can be supports. And there's this idea of, the Matthew effect in reading. And it's this idea that children who have foundational skills, their progress takes off, and children who lack foundational skills, it's very slow. And so the gap grows over the grade levels. So could you talk a little bit more about what parents should the kinds of questions they should be asking or what they should be looking for to know, are their schools using these kinds of screenings?
Well, this is really a hot topic, and there's a lot of money on the line here because the vendors for some of these tests have lobbyists. They are working hard in the legislature trying to make sure that whatever is written in any laws in any of the states will make sure that they can still sell their product. I don't want to get in the names of any vendors, but what I can tell you is the question I would ask your school is, what can you tell me specifically about my child's ability to decode words, to be able to hear, know a sound and a symbol to go together, that they're fluent when they read, it's a smooth reading and they're not hesitating and real choppy because they're having trouble decoding. That's the very, very beginning. If they really can't tell you that and they can just hand you a number and say, well, you know, they're really below the rest of the kids. I want to know how they're below, because if you don't know that information, how will you then plan instruction? So, and Leah, you may want to add to this, but to me, that is what, I mean, I counsel parents, and of course, my parents that I tutor their children, you know, some of them are on IEPs, some aren't. And I'm like, we need to see what the school has. What do they know about your child? And sometimes some of these tests, the teachers hand us a number and it's like, well, they're in the 85th percentile. Well, what do we know about, let me give you an example. I've worked with middle schoolers who, when they, when you do a simple screener, you can very quickly see, wow, they don't know some of the sound symbol relationships. They might have come across something with the DGE. They had no idea that it says j, like in the word judge. So there were some things that pop out that you're saying, wow, this is something we need to address. This isn't this child doesn't have comprehension skills. He can't read the word. Mm-hmm. So I would start there. Leah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. And Joy, please hop in, because I know this is something we're also passionate about. And thank you for all the questions and comments, like really helpful. I had a reading with my child's teacher who we love. We love his teacher. And however, I was told, like, and here's your child's reading level. And I was given a Fontes and Pinnell reading level. It's been so debunked as a valid, reliable assessment, and telling, someone your child is A or B or M or P, whatever level that is, it's not really helpful. What we know is aligned with evidence-based practices is that schools should be having assessments that give a clear picture of the sub-skills of literacy. Where is this little human at in these sub-skills? How are they doing in phonemic awareness, which is the sounds, phonics, just matching letters and sounds. Fluency is like, can you read smoothly and at a good speed? Comprehension, do you understand what you're reading? And vocabulary, right? So if their assessment gives really clear scores for where they're at and their growth in those sub-skills, that's a really good place to start. If you're just getting at, well, they're at X level, you're not getting the grain size, right? And in the same way, I think about if I go to the doctor, right, for a well visit, and the pediatrician says, like, your kid gets an A-. I don't know what that means, right? But if they tell me that, my son is doing well in all these other areas, but maybe there's the delay with fine motor skills, right? Which there was with my son. Great. Then we knew we needed occupational therapy to do something about that. If I just got an overall grade or score for my child, it doesn't really give me a lot to work with. So I would encourage you to ask for that.
Yeah. And Leah, I'd like to add, so if you hear, well, this is where they are in foundational skills, I want to know more. That's what I think that they should be able to break those down. And phonemic awareness is huge. I tutored a 29-year-old young man, and he had about a third grade reading level. And it was pretty surprising when I did a screen on him on phonemic awareness, how poor his phonemic awareness was. Once we started to shore that up, it had a direct impact on his spelling. I mean, so it's an absolutely necessary skill that he didn't learn in those early grades.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, you are completely framing this, like, just giving a level, it doesn't really tell, like, what are the strengths, what are the areas of need, right? So, and when we don't have that information, just to keep giving more instruction isn't always helpful. And again, I always like to make comparisons. It's like if someone is diabetic, they may need to take insulin to help them. But if you just say, oh, well, just give them penicillin, that's not what they need. And so if a child is struggling with phonemic awareness, that's what they need the focused support in, to build onto other things. Susan, can you address this question that Anna raised about vision testing? Because this often comes up around dyslexia as well.
Yeah, and actually, I can make available to you a great response on this from a Dr. Lauren Katz at 3LI here in Ann Arbor. I'm not an expert at this, but she clearly said that dyslexia is not a vision problem. That is a fact. It is not a vision problem. If your child has a vision problem, that is something else, a lazy eye, something like that. But I will send this article to you if you want to make it available with somehow when we put this out to the general masses. But it's unfortunate that the parents that, and what Dr. Katz told me is there are parents that are grasping at straws because they just want to help their child learn to read. And there are examples where parents are led to believe we do this, your child won't have dyslexia or help dyslexia. And they spend thousands of dollars because a lot of it isn't covered by insurance. And it isn't the thing. That isn't to say that children might have a vision problem and they need some therapy for it. But dyslexia is not a vision problem.
Yeah, and I think that's a big shift even from when I did my training in undergrad. There were these ideas that use things like these Erlen colored overlays and things, because I think one of the things that's really important for us all to understand is that just like any other field, education literacy is growing as a body of knowledge. So what we know about how kids learn to read, it's not like, oh, this is just another fad. No, we're learning because the body of research keeps growing. And so, some of the things we thought may have been true, we learned, oh, actually that wasn't the case. But we know now, like very solidly, that dyslexia is core phonological processing difficulties, right? That's what it's about. So there may be these other pieces. And just looking at all the great comments and thoughts here. I really appreciate. Go ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to draw through lines through some of the things that I was seeing in the comments. So there's been questions about what are the screeners and also what's being done or what's being shared when it comes to the assessment data. One other question that I might suggest that you ask your district when it comes to the assessments and when it comes to the data that you're receiving from teachers or from the district about your student is ask them what time they are giving to their educators when it comes to learning and processing with the data that they're getting about their students. We all know that classroom teachers are under constant pressure to be creating engaging lesson plans and addressing student behavioral and emotional needs and always conducting their own classroom assessments in addition to screening and standardized assessments required by their school district or the state. And so they are often, under a lot of pressure. They have a lot of things going on. And sometimes the district isn't giving them time to process the data that they're receiving. And that can be a huge support for educators. And so by asking that question of the district, I think you can help the district to prioritize the teacher's time and spending some time digging into the data they're receiving about the students that they're serving, your students.
And we need data. We need good data to be able to talk about, right?
Yes. And so that connects back to a question that came through a little while ago. I think it was from Michelle, is what are the types of screening tools that should be used according to the bills? So do they reference any specific types, or what could we look for there?
Yes, actually, if you look at the definition at the very end of the bill, there are 6 components that we're looking at. Leah just mentioned them: phonemic awareness, letter sound correspondence, fluency. They do a RAND score, with rapid atomized naming, which is something you do with just the really youngest kids. So there, it's very specific. I will tell you, I just had a meeting this week with Dr. Tim Odegaard at Middle Tennessee State. He has a dyslexia center there. He's really expert at the field of assessment. And he and I had a conversation because I was going through the language on the bills with him again to say, do we have what's cutting edge here? And he said, what we know is there are computer assisted tests, and then there are tests that have a behavioral component where the kid points something out or says it, okay, where they're actually involved, the teacher sits with. Clearly, what they're seeing is the best data is gathered, not in a computer assisted test at this time. And that will make some people's hair go on fire that are using computer assisted tests at their schools. But he said they just are missing students, and as high as 30%. It's pretty shocking, but some of the ones that are the best are clearly where a teacher can sit and time the child for saying, name these letters, and then give me the sounds of these letters. I mean, you're actually seeing the child do it. You're hearing it. You're seeing it. It means so much to the teacher. Now, one of the reasons the computer assisted tests have been so hot is it's like, well, just put your earphones and hand the iPad to the student.
Susan, can I ask a clarifying question though? When you're saying computer assisted, it seems like what you're actually meaning, I want to make sure I'm understanding, is that it's more like computer facilitated assessment, right? Like put your headphones on, click, go through. Because
they call them CATs, C-A-T.
Okay, thank you.
In the literature, they call them,
Okay.
You can have computer assisted in one of these other tests where the teacher gets the answers from the student and punches it in on an iPad just so she can keep track of her data. That's different. The student's not interacting directly with the computer. Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to clarify that is our coalition, 313 Reads, we mobilize a battery of assessments called Acadience Reading. And it used to be called DIBBLES, Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. But this happens digitally. So we mobilize a literacy assessment core that assesses students one-on-one. They do use a tablet to do that, but it's the individual interacting with the child to do it.
So they're looking at a screen as opposed to paper. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. But it's that. Yeah. And Acadience is one, I didn't want to get into names, but that is one that's solid. And so that's where the big debate is right now. Mm-hmm. And I think the benchmark assessments through Fonda and all that, those are so far out of what is appropriate. Unfortunately, schools are still using them, but now it's down to these computer-driven, kid sits at it. Because, I think that they sell it with the idea that you don't have, once a kid gets plugged in, they can just go and you get a score. And how's a teacher going to sit down for 9-10 minutes with each student? But if in the end you get data that doesn't really help you plan instruction, I mean, what's the best use of time? I guess I would ask.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I would say about that is, so our coalition is made up of school-based literacy educators and also community-based. And so it's interesting for a lot of folks, it's this reluctance to move away from things like Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessments, because they feel like they want to sit down, have the conversation with the reader. They want to really listen to them read. And so that's, this idea like they need to really proctor that. And there is this importance in recognizing the expertise of the educator, right? Or of the tutor.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
That's where, so something like an Acadience or other things, yes, you it's a valid, reliable assessment. You're using a digital tool to do it. You're still engaging with and listening with the learner. That's very different than let me get you started, put on the headphones and go. But there are a lot of time constraints for that. I recognize. Anna asked a really interesting question about, are there any preliminary assessments that families can use at home?
There really are. There's, and I just want to tag on what you just said. I absolutely value teachers with training that are knowledgeable, because a well-trained teacher can sit down with a student with a passage and can find out a lot about that student. But, they have to be trained in it. It may not be valid and reliable statistically, but it can still be very useful. There's actually a couple that I recommend to parents. There's something called the QPS, Quick Phonics Screener. And it's so easy to administer. It's free. You just find it online and you'll see what your child needs to do. And you can kind of see where your child breaks down. It starts with naming letters, giving letter sounds, saying simple CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant words like dog, sit, cup, and then it becomes more complex phonetically. That's one thing that I can tell you about. Dibbles is free, Dibbles 8th edition. You can go, if Dibbles is spelled funny too, it's Dibels. If you go to the National Center on Improving Literacy, they, I believe, have access to that Dibbles. They're constantly doing research with it. That's why it's in its 8th edition. And it's like Acadience, except Acadience is a purchased thing, and schools buy it, and it's a little different, but same idea. I don't know, Leah, do you know of some others? I mean, I know I can go through a whole list of ones, but that's a start.
Yeah, I think those are ones that I would point to. And I also want to name that. 313Reads and MRA, we also sit at the Early Literacy Task Force for the state of Michigan. And so in naming things like Dibbles and Acadience, those are, very well esteemed and used across the state as well. And so we use Acadience, which is basically the electronic version of Dibbles. And Susan, I think that's really powerful that you named that, families can use that too to help get a sense of, where their readers are at.
Yeah. So and I give it to my parents before I actually take a student. A lot of times I'll say, if you would like, you want to gather some information, I just send it to them in a link, and I say, go through this. And then I have a spelling, I'm sending them to Joy, another one called Gallisto Ellis, which you can actually find free. I've bought the little book because it gives me more statistical stuff, but it has a spelling assessment, which follows right along with the one you just have your child read the words, and you can see where the student breaks down. It's pretty obvious. I'll send that to you, Joy.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all these resources are so helpful. I wanted to come back to one of the other questions we had, and maybe Leah can speak to this. And then also, if you're watching, feel free to chime into the chat a little bit about your own experience. But a question that I'm having is why is this important? Especially, why is this an urgent matter? Why is literacy, early childhood literacy, an urgent matter for our community in the greater Metro Detroit area, and specifically in Detroit as well? Why is this so important?
Before we started today, I wanted to look at current statistics, and I checked. I wanted to look at. We talk about the school to prison pipeline. And the latest statistic I was able to pull out on that issue, and this isn't Detroit, this is the country, this is Michigan, this is the country, is over 70% of inmates in America's prisons cannot read above a 4th grade level. I mean, that is just a statistic that blows your mind. 2/3 of students who cannot read proficiently by the end of 4th grade will end up in jail or on welfare. Like Leah said earlier, it will determine the trajectory of your life, your ability to get a job, care for your children, have good health care, because you have to be able to read things and, be proactive about your health. I mean, it really determines a person's life. So for me, the urgency, and I just feel like people aren't feeling the urgency enough to have changed sooner. And I'm very impatient. But to me, that speaks volumes. Leah, take it from there.
Yeah, no, that absolutely. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat. So there is a Governor's Early Literacy Foundation that provides some of the data that Susan just mentioned. But the Department of Justice itself does mention the connection between literacy and reading failure. What I want to sort of reframe that, however, they frame it as like academic failure, delinquency, violence, crime, reading failure. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's really important in our coalition, to me personally and professionally, is that literacy is about access and equity and justice. So again, we don't have a reading gap, we have a reading access gap. So, mm-hmm. There are zip codes in Detroit where fewer than 4% of 3rd graders are reading on grade level, fewer than 4%. And I just saw something the other day. It was like a snapshot at a glance of Rochester Public Schools, another district here in Michigan, that said, 92% of students in the district are reading at grade level at 3rd grade. there is nothing inherently different about the abilities of students in Rochester versus the abilities of students here in my community in Detroit. What is inherently different is, students in my community are living in a space that's been historically marginalized by systemic and structural racism and violence and anti-Blackness, et cetera. So what I really want to center is that we cannot tease apart these policies and the science of reading from equity and justice and liberation, right? And so, one thing that I do have concerns about is that the science of reading, it's been very much a white-led field. It's very much centered like white leaders and thinkers. I identify as a white woman. However, I also want to remind us all and call us in together to center that culturally responsive practices are also evidence-based, right? So that's something that often gets left out of the conversation. And Joy asked, like, why does this matter? Well, it matters because, when we have fewer than 4% of students reading at grade level in third grade, and we talked about that Matthew effect where the gap just widens because, once you get to fourth grade and beyond, you're reading all day during the school day. You're reading in science and math and social, right? The reading just compounds and you get more and more behind. And we know that, that just doesn't go away. So I think about a couple years ago, I was tutoring for credit recovery for secondary students. It was over at Mumford High School. They were in this Saturdays in the D credit recovery program with the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. We had students who couldn't do the credit recovery modules because some of them were reading at second, third grade levels. And if people think that, that those students are going to exit grade 12, whatever grade, they're able to have access to, and then go out into the workforce and suddenly, be adults with the literacy level they need, they won't. And so this is more than just what's a score on the M-STEP, what's a grade in school. It's about, does that human have access to complete high school? Does that human have access to the tools they need for post-secondary education, whether that's college or training, whatever that is? Like, literacy is just foundational to all these opportunities. So literacy is one of these things that it's central to things like workforce development, financial stability. Literacy even has a direct relationship with life expectancy. And when I tell people that, they're like, what? I'm like, yes, it's been very clearly shown because there's a lot of literacy demands if you get sick, right? If you have to navigate treatment options, medication options, things like that. If you have low literacy, you're not able to make those kinds of informed decisions for yourself. So literacy empowers across so many levels. And I know I'm sort of ranting about this, but it's something I'm so passionate about because when people are like, oh, you support science of reading, I'm like, yeah, I do, because teaching reading well is justice work, right? Our children, all children deserve access to literacy, and all teachers deserve access to what they need to teach it well.
Absolutely.
If I can add something here, what I know is that over the years of teaching, and I mostly taught in Lansing schools, it was, and my sons were at East Lansing. And the frustrating thing for me was, I was lucky that the students that had me at Rio Elementary were having a highly trained teacher work with them. And my students were on IEPs, they were learning disabled, and they were making progress. In some other classrooms, they weren't. And they weren't able to go hire a tutor because they didn't have the financial resources. And so the responsibility of schools, that's where it breaks it down. If, I look at some of the school districts that sometimes will tout these scores, and they may be doing great things, but I would like to know how many of them have private tutors when they run into problems. And it really shows up it shows up a lot more for students that have financial problems. So it makes it all the more important that schools are doing the work, making sure that teachers are in the classrooms that are trained and know how to help these children, first of all, with core instruction and then how to intervene. But it's like 3 times, 100 times more important, it seems to me, when students can't get help outside. I mean, it's important for all kids, but it really, really, really is magnified. When I was teaching at Lansing Community College, I had adults that had remedial reading issues. And there was a 40-year-old gentleman had come back to LCC, Lansing Community College, to get trained in another field. I don't remember what he had done before, but as I'm teaching them some of the information I know, because I gave them all a screening at the beginning, and some were reading at second and third grade level. And this was a remedial course. I remember teaching some things and then staying after him one day. And he just said to me, why didn't they teach us this way when I was little? It would have made all the difference. And I thought he was totally capable. And yet it was so much harder as an adult. So, we owe it to our teachers to make sure they have access to the training. And then we owe it to the children and the families that we do right by them.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like when you talk with teachers who've had access to letters training, and Susan mentioned that $10 million in funding is available to Michigan educators. You can connect to that through your districts or through your ISDs, like Oakland Schools or Wayne Risa or Macomb Schools. But what's also tricky about that is that only supports school-based literacy educators. So I think that there was a really important comment that Michelle raised about when she and other families are paying for tutoring, if they're able to do that can, artificially inflate scores. But what does that mean when the folks who are doing that tutoring, they haven't had access to evidence-based practices? And that's something that we care a lot about as coalition, is to say, and there's a long history in Detroit of folks standing in the gap to support students when the schools may not have the capacity at that point to meet the needs, right? And so how do we make sure that they have access to what they need as well? And the thing I think a lot about too is, as a former university professor and someone who worked at Michigan Department of Ed around teacher preparation, that when teachers are well prepared, it supports retention. So right now we have as we know, a significant problem with attracting and retaining teachers. When we prepare them well to teach reading and feel successful in that does support retention, which is a win-win because that supports kids' success.
Yeah.
Something I want to lift up before we get on to talking about something else is, Leah, you mentioned this tie between literacy and justice. And I also think about within that, there's a really cool loop into what we are doing right now and talking about literacy advocacy. If you don't have access to really science of reading based literacy instruction when you're younger and good literacy instruction when you're younger, then when you get to the point where you are a citizen who is voting and participating in this country and trying to have a voice, trying to have a say, you might not even have access to be able to do that because you might not be able to read the Senate bill and understand what it says, things like that. And that is something that I feel really passionate about as a social studies teacher, as someone who is interacting with the history of our country all the time with my students, and also seeing with high school students the deficits that are happening because of the lack of really wonderful literacy instruction when they're younger. So I just want to also highlight that, by having really wonderful instruction throughout our education when it comes to literacy, we can help to empower students to participate in our democracy and to participate as citizens in their community and advocate for what they need in their community.
Absolutely. And Michelle raised a really important question about, curriculum in alignment with science of reading. And I think, one of the really critical things to keep in mind too is that, teachers are in this space where typically it's really clear in a district, like this is the curriculum and this is what you teach, and like this is the approach to reading. And we are very much on the side of, championing teachers, advocating alongside teachers, and that this is not about teacher bashing. Teachers have not had access to what they need to do to have the impact, right? So, I really appreciate this question. And Susan, could you comment a little bit about what families might do to have these more productive conversations with their district about curriculum?
Yeah, I'm going to direct you to another event that's coming up, because we're going to have people on that panel that actually went through this whole thing in Upper Arlington, Ohio. And that event is next Monday night through the Michigan International Dyslexia Association group I'm a part of. Trying to talk to your district, first of all, to your teacher, to the child's teacher, to the principal, possibly a curriculum leader, and ask about assessments, ask about, are they doing some of the things that look like structured literacy, which if you go on the International Dyslexia Association site, that's the national, and you can find out more about structured literacy. If they are completely resistant, what this group of people in Upper Arlington did, that's near Columbus, Ohio, they created a group of parents, not to harass the school, but to try to work as partners. And Brett Tingley, who was the leader and organizer of that group, has some really great things to talk about, trying to find a way to work with the district. Now, they ended up having to do a state complaint, and it was a big deal. It shone the light on a situation that wasn't working. Reading recovery was part of the whole mess. Ohio State University was part of the mess because reading recovery is grounded in there. And it was quite the case. It blew the lid off of things in Ohio. And now if you look at Ohio, they've passed legislation. I mean, things are really happening there. So I think you begin by talking to your teacher, by talking to your curriculum leader in the school, which is your principal, and then your curriculum leader. But it's very difficult. And that's why when we want to pass legislation, because that will give you more ammunition, I guess you could say, but it's in law. It's written here in law. The same with the dyslexia handbook. It's written in the handbook that the State Department of Ed put out. And that there already is a handbook. The bill, if it's passed, will update the handbook. But so that's why it's so important. And I know we're getting close to the end, that your voices are so important to help us move these bills and get them to the governor's desk. And I have a step-by-step document I'd like to give to all of you when we're ready here, to show you what you can actually do and to pass to your friends to do, to have your voices heard, to our legislators.
I think the other thing too is I would really encourage people to be present at school board meetings. I've been really surprised. And again, I love my son's school. I love his school leaders. I love his teachers, but they're not teaching reading in evidence-based ways. And being at school board meetings and being part of the conversations is crucial. And I was surprised to be the only parent at the school board meeting, right? So it's, I think folks in some ways have been, particularly in public charters here in Detroit, and over half our students go to public charters, have been disenfranchised from that process, but it's really important.
I agree. And as a board member, I can tell you that definitely, we're elected to represent the people in our district, those families. So contact us. We don't get into the minutia of doing a curriculum as a school board member. We're directing our superintendent, but having the voices of the community, I mean, you're our client pretty much, and we need to listen.
Yeah.
Susan, do you put, I can't find it. I'm sorry. Could you put the link to that event? Could you put that event link in?
Oh boy.
So I think Leah,
Michelle, I just saw Michelle's comment. Michelle, I hate that you say teachers are afraid. It makes me sad. That's sad that a school district would make, or a school board would ever make teachers uncomfortable that they couldn't speak. But I would say to teachers, if you go through the channels to talk to your fellow teachers and see what they think, and talk to your principal and work your way up within the system, and you really don't get an answer, and you really feel that things are just off the rails as far as what needs to be happening, I hope you do come and talk to your school board with a group of people. And if you feel uncomfortable, help some parents come and do it. But that would be unfortunate that a school board or a school wouldn't want to listen to their teachers.
And I just put the link in to the event that Susan mentioned on Monday. And Kath is with us from the Michigan Education Justice Coalition, and she also lifted up that they are hosting screenings of The Right to Read statewide. 313 Reads did this. It is a documentary about access to evidence-based reading. It's really amazing. And generates a lot of conversation and call to advocacy.
Hey, the thing you just put in the chat is actually the document that we want to talk about for the committee meeting. So if you'll give me a minute, I mean, I can pull up the other one if you'd like. It'll take me just a minute, but I think I have it right here.
Yeah. And so just as we're thinking about where we're going from here, we're talking about action steps. We're going to get into some things and share some more links with you all. And if you register to attend this event after it's over, I will email you out the recording as well as the resources that we're sharing. And all of the comments that are on this live video should be captured and saved when it is reposted on Facebook as well. So you should be able to access all of that. I see some questions about being able to come back to the links.
Okay, here you go. This one for movie event. There you go. That one there is for the movie event. If you're able, I don't know if this is the time to do it, but I see we're almost running out of time. Can you open up the one that Leah put up there that shows sort of the activism steps? Because we put this together, and this will just, if you've never tried to speak to the legislature and you don't even know where to start, this is a how-to. I'm a teacher, so you know I'm trying to teach and make it simple to understand. But if let me tell you the three things that a person needs to do, and if she pulls it up, great, but you can look at it at home. Number one, if the committee, and I believe the committee will be meeting next Tuesday, if you go on the Literacy for All site, there's a place to sign up for alerts. We'll make sure we confirm that with you by the end of the week. But if the committee goes, as we are told it's going to go next Tuesday, there is a way to write in your support to the clerk of the committee. And I spell out exactly where to send it. Mike Stoskis is the clerk for that committee, what it needs to say. And I give you an example. I actually do one for you so you can see how to do it. The next thing are phone calls. I can tell you that phone calls make legislators very inconvenienced. It halts business in the office, leaving lots of voicemails, that sort of thing. They also have interns in their office that are keeping tallies on things. So we give you all the phone numbers. You'll notice this phone numbers of people on the committees in the House and Senate, and also the leader of the House and Senate. And then the last thing is you can do emails, or you can always send something USPS, but we give you all the addresses of those same people I just mentioned. And I give you a few sample letters just to get you started if you're like, I don't even know what to write. You can write your own story and why it's important to you, or I tried to make it as easy as I could. So those things I would tell you do later in the week after you get an alert from us as far as the committee, but you can send those other things anytime you want because the conversation is happening.
Thank you so much, Susan. I want to also highlight something that we can all do like kind of right now, if you are interested, is bring your voice to a letter that we at 313 Reads are going to be mailing and sending to our legislators in support of these three bills. Leah is going to drop a link to that as well. So we have this open letter and we have a Google form that you can fill out to add your name to this letter, and as well as following some of the other steps that Susan was highlighting, bringing your voice to support this legislation, to support literacy for all in our state is really important. And this is one small step that you can take today that should only take you a few minutes. Okay, so we've shared out some action steps. There's tons of links coming through. And again, for everyone, we are going to be sharing these resources. If you registered for the event, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with this information. We really appreciate you all for being here today so very much. Thank you so much to Susan for sharing all of your expertise and all of the information that you have and know about literacy and about these bills specifically. We really appreciate you. And thank you to Leah for all of your contributions when it comes to understanding 313 Reads and also the context in Detroit. I appreciate both of you so much. And is there any last comments that either of you want to make?
The only thing I would tell you is change happens, and it starts with just a few people, and it grows and it grows. And who would have thought, when I know how this started, going and talking to Julie Brixey, who was in the house, and Jeff Irwin, and it just sort of, the more people and more people, here we are, and we are so close. And so take a few minutes, speak up. Every one of your voices has an impact on this, and we are so close to getting it to the governor's desk. And I encourage you to join us.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to end and invite folks, if you are here from a community organization, that could be a 501c3, a school, a faith-based org, a coalition, we invite you to learn more about Books in the D. We have been really so grateful to receive $1 million in-kind donation from Molina Foundation of new children's books from pre-K to grade 12 and adults. So if you're serving children and youth or adult literacy programs, please apply for Books in the D. And we look forward to connecting with you that way.
Yes, thank you so much. And if you're still here and you want to drop something in the chat that you feel empowered by or empowered to do after this session, we'd love to hear from you, what impact this time has had on you. And I know we didn't get to every single question, so feel free to always reach out to us at 313 Reads with your literacy questions, if you're looking to be connected to literacy programming in our community. We are here for you. And I'm really excited about the 60,000 books. So definitely, if that's something that can that might apply to you or your organization, reach out to us so we can start spreading that book joy.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I feel very honored that you would invite me.
Thank you, Joy, for championing this. We're grateful for you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. See ya.
Bye.